You're watching C-SPAN 2 with politics and public affairs, weekdays featuring live coverage of the U.S. Senate. On weeknights, watch key public policy events, and every weekend, the latest nonfiction authors and books on Book TV. You can see past programs and get our schedules at our websites, and you can join in the conversation on social media sites.
The Senate is about to gavel in for the week. Senators will start the day with general speeches. At 5 Eastern, they'll return to debate a bill to fund the Army Corps of Engineers water projects. Senators are considering amendments on that. No votes today.
This Senate will come to order. The Chaplain Retired Admiral Barry Black will lead the Senate in prayer. Chaplain Black.
Let us pray. Lord, you have been our nation's defense, and we look to you for shelter and refuge. You have spoken in your holiness, and we rejoice at your words that provide light in darkness. Bless our senators. May they seek to serve and honor you. May their words and deeds reflect an earnest desire for justice and righteousness in our nation and world. Crown their years with your goodness as they trust you to do what is best for all. We pray in your holy name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. The Majority Leader.
We're not in a quorum call.
We are not.
I apologize to the chair for being a little bit tardy. I try not to be, especially when the President Pro Tem is presiding. Mr. President, following leader remarks, the Senate will be in a period of morning business, and senators during that period of time will be allowed to speak for up to 10 minutes each. The filing deadline for all first-degree amendments to S-601, Water Resource Development Act, is 4 p.m. today. I had a conversation with Senator Vitter on Friday, Senator Boxer today, and I think we're very, very close to being able to do universal agreement on that legislation to wrap it up as early as tomorrow. I hope that, in fact, is true. As previously announced, there will be no roll call votes today. The first vote of the week will be on cloture on WRDA at noon tomorrow unless we work out an agreement. Mr. President, I have been following very closely reports on irregularities in the Internal Revenue Service scrutiny of applications for nonprofit status. These allegations, of course, are very troubling, and I intend to take a close look at the Inspector General's report when it is released. Concerns such as these are the reason we have inspectors general. They're tasked with finding and preventing fraud, waste, and abuse, identifying breaches of law and protocol, and promoting efficiency in federal government. Our inspectors general have an excellent record of responsibility, and specifically, Russell George, the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration, has an exceptionally strong reputation as a watchdog of the IRS. And, of course, watching the IRS is also watching the IRS for the American people. I'm confident he's examining this issue and doing it very well, as he has done in the past. I look forward to this report. The alleged actions of IRS employees in the Cincinnati field office would be a terrible breach of the public's trust. Whether they're investigating conservative groups or liberal groups, they should not be involved in this. Targeting any group based on its political stance is completely inappropriate. We need to get to the bottom of what happened, and the Inspector General will get to the bottom of this. In the meantime, no one should jump to conclusions. But we should all rest assured, as soon as we have the Inspector General's report, the Senate will quickly take appropriate action. I've spoken today to the Senior Senator from Montana, Chairman of the Finance Committee, Max Baucus. He's looking into this matter in his role as Chairman of that Finance Committee. If the Inspector General's report indicates further investigation is needed, I have full confidence in the ability of Senator Baucus and the Finance Committee to get to the bottom of this matter and recommend appropriate action. Mr. President, as indicated in this chart, 51 days ago, the Senate passed its budget. It's now been 51 days. So why are Republicans standing in the way? A picture's worth 1,000 words, Mr. President, and that's the picture. Common sense and more than 2 centuries of history dictates that the next step would be to go to conference and try to find common ground between our budget and the budget passed by the House of Representatives. The Conference Committee is one of the oldest traditions in the entire American government. In fact, during the first session of Congress, number 1, on April 7, 1789, the day after a quorum had been secured and the first meeting of Congress was held, the Senate charged a committee with setting out the rules for such conferences. During that first Congress, the 2 houses convened many times on conference committees to consider many different things that they disagreed on. Difference of opinion over amendments to the Constitution, difference of agreement, difference of opinion over legislating as to what the court should do, and looking at bills that created the Post Office and the Treasury Department. All these had bills, one passed by the House, one passed by the Senate. They got together and worked out the differences. In this esteemed tradition, Democrats now wish to resolve their difference over the budget in a conference committee subject to the disinfectant of public scrutiny instead of behind closed doors, as we have done for more than 2 centuries. A number of Republican senators have joined Democrats in calling for such a conference. It's now been 51 days since the Senate passed its budget. Even Republicans are asking, why can't we go to conference? This is what the senior senator from Arizona, Republican, said just last week, and I quote, "I'm very much in favor of it. I think we ought to do it right away. After 4 years of complaining about Harry Reid's failure to bring up a budget, and then we do one and block conference, it's incomprehensible." That's John McCain's quote. After 3 years of Republican yearning for such a regular order, Democrats assumed every Republican senator would be enthusiastic to go to conference. But although a few Republicans, such as Senator McCain, have called for a conference committee, Republican leaders have refused for weeks to name conferees, flouting more than 200 years of tradition. Republican leaders have also refused to explain why they won't go to conference. But the longer Republicans delay, the more transparent this partisan political tactics become. It's transparent. They oppose transparency. They do not want openness in government. Republicans continue to put off a fiscal compromise until our backs are up against yet another manufactured crisis, a catastrophic default on the financial obligations we have as a country. Republicans hope to use the threat of a default as a bargaining chip to extract concessions. Extract concessions for tax breaks for the wealthy, extract concessions for drastic cuts to Medicare, extract concessions for more draconian cuts to programs that keep the elderly, the sick, the disabled, and the most vulnerable Americans from slipping further into poverty. Even though Republicans caused themselves and the country immense political harm by pursuing this wrong-headed strategy last summer, they're at it again. And this time, Republicans aren't even hiding their desire to cause a first-of-its-kind default on our nation's financial obligation. Last week, the House of Representatives passed a bill called the Full Faith and Credit. If there were ever an Orwellian name, this is it. In their lexicon, Mr. President, up is down, down is up, east is west, north is south. A bill called the Full Faith and Credit Act? Come on. This legislation ranks the nation's debts in order of priority, their priority, the Republican-dominated, Tea Party-driven House of Representatives. Listen to this. Here's what the legislation says. In the event of a Republican-forced default, the nation would stop payments to Medicare, veterans, active duty military service members, and national security personnel, and you name it, everything except paying the debt to China. In addition to threatening the full faith and credit of the United States, this legislation would cost American jobs, hurt businesses, and really tank the economy. And it wouldn't prevent default. If an American family has a mortgage payment, car payment, credit card payment, but pays only 3 of those bills, the family's still in default. The federal government lives by the same rules. If we pay China but default on obligations to our veterans, we're still in default. If we pay China but not our Border Patrol, but not our FBI, but not our law enforcement officers, including drug enforcement, we're in default. If we pay China but not our troops serving overseas, we're in default. The Republican approach to default is totally irresponsible. Republicans know this risky measure is a non-starter in the Senate. And even if it could pass the Senate, which it won't, President Obama would veto it. So, Mr. President, Americans are tired of these protracted fights over the debt ceiling caused by the Tea Party-driven Republicans in Congress. It's through compromise, not through hostage-taking or political blackmail, that we can set our nation on the road to fiscal responsibility. That compromise begins by going to conference on the budget. Americans agree that the path to economic prosperity runs through regular order of this legislative process, this legislative body, a process that honors more than 2 centuries of work. Finally, Mr. President, I had hoped that we would have an opportunity for the Republican leader to explain why he objects to going to conference on the budget. We informed the Republican side that we'd ask this consent today, tomorrow, the next day, and every day. And let's hope we don't get to 52, 53, 54, 65, 75. But the way they're going, I guess they're never going to go to conference. We informed the Republican side that we would ask consent. Today, as every day, we're in session. And while the Republican cloakroom, we call it, informed us that there was an objection, no Republican was available to explain that objection in person. Now, I did this last week again. They had no one here. And I did the same thing I'm going to do here. I'm going to, after I ask the consent, I will withdraw my request out of respect for the long tradition of comedy. And this is not comedy, it's comity. Mr. President, it's outrageous that, first of all, they block this and then don't have the courage for somebody to stand and object. It speaks volumes that no Republican senator was available or willing to explain the bizarre objection to a perfectly reasonable request to go to conference and work out differences. The only explanation we've had so far came from the junior senator from Texas, where he said, we'll go to conference, but you have to agree to what we want before we agree to go to conference. How's that for a deal? But since this junior senator from Texas was not available today, no other Republican senator appears willing to stand up and explain why Senate Republicans are now standing in the way of the budget. I'm going to ask this, and then I will withdraw it. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to consideration of calendar number 33, H. Con. Res. 25, that the amendment, which is at the desk, the text of S. Conres 8, the budget resolution passed by the Senate be inserted in lieu thereof. That H. Conres 25 as amended be agreed to. Motion be considered made and laid on the table that the Senate insist on its amendment, request a conference with the House on the disagreeing votes of the two houses, and the chair be authorized to appoint conferees on part of the Senate, all with no intervening action or debate. Now, Mr. President, I would just elaborate. This is a process that started being developed. The first Congress was ever held in this country, 1789. My Republican colleagues for years complained about not following regular order. They said we didn't have a budget. We didn't need one, but they said we didn't have one. And we didn't do one by resolution. We did one by passing a law. But regardless of that, they came to the floor and talked about that. Now we have regular order in their minds and everyone else's mind, and they refuse to move forward on this. This, Mr. President, is really out of line. It's ridiculous. It's unfair to the American people, but it's very, very obvious what's going on. I withdraw my request, Mr. President.
Request is withdrawn.
Mr. President, I would, just one final statement here. The presiding officer, State of Connecticut, and I want the record spread with how much I admire what you and Senator Blumenthal have done in not letting the American people forget about Sandy Hook. Not forget about these little boys and girls, little tiny boys and girls. My little grandchildren don't live here. I have 3 grandchildren, but they're teenagers. My little children in Nevada, grandchildren, so I don't have a chance to see them. But I was in church yesterday and saw all these little kids, little beautiful children. To think these little boys and girls, just like the ones I saw yesterday, would be gunned down, shot multiple times, most of them. Teachers trying to save these little children, just cut down with automatic weapon. So I admire the 2 senators from Connecticut, that you are not going to let this fade from our minds. Keep in mind, I've met with the Sandy Hook people on several occasions. They're not asking for anything that's outrageous. Their first step is to say, someone who is crazy, that's not a good term of art, someone who has extreme mental problems, they shouldn't be able to buy a gun. Someone who's a criminal shouldn't be able to buy a gun. That's all we want. We'll settle for that. The people of Sandy Hook will settle for that. So, Mr. President, I admire what you've done, Senator Blumenthal has done, and we cannot let these terrible things that have happened. Aurora, Colorado. Someone walks in with a weapon that has a magazine of 100 bullets. He would have killed a lot more, but the gun jammed. Mr. President, I would ask the chair to announce the business of the day.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business until 5 o'clock p.m., with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. In a quorum call here on the floor of the Senate waiting for senators to speak. They've started the day with general speeches, and at 5 o'clock Eastern Time, they're going to return to debate a bill to fund the Army Corps of Engineers water projects. They'll be considering amendments for that bill today. No votes today, however. And on the other side of the Capitol, the House is resuming legislative work tomorrow. Members will vote this week on repealing the health care law and requiring the SEC to look into the costs of new regulations before implementing them. You can watch the House live over on C-SPAN when they gavel back in. Also this week in the Senate, immigration legislation and a markup 10 a.m. will have live coverage on C-SPAN, and that coverage will shift to C-SPAN 3 at noon when the House comes in. And then Thursday, more immigration legislation markup, and that time is to be announced. We'll let you know here on the C-SPAN networks. We're going to take a look at the consideration, the opening statements from the immigration markup, which began last week. The Gang of Eight bipartisan immigration bill. This is from Thursday. Committee members all agreed the immigration system is broken, but they vary widely on whether comprehensive immigration reform is the way forward or if the legislation should be broken up into smaller parts. And again, this is the opening statements from Thursday.
Here, we can begin consideration of the immigration bill by voting on amendments this morning. I recognize the ranking member for his opening remarks. I had intended to call upon Senator Schumer to offer the first amendment, one he and the other sponsors of the bill filed and circulated last week to perfect the underlying bill. If adopted, the bill is amended, be then open to further amendment. Even though everybody has spoken dozens of times about this on the floor and TV and everything else, Senator Grassley tells me that some still want to speak, so we'll give everybody up to 4 minutes. But I would hope that if people don't feel they have to repeat over and over again what they've already said a dozen times, we can get to work in marking up the bill. Hundreds of amendments have been filed. They're posted on the committee website. I hope we'll consider which of their filed amendments they intend to offer. So we can go. We'll keep on going as many days as necessary. We'll consider the sponsors' perfect amendments, start with amendments filed to the beginning sections of the bill. Then we'll move on to amendments filed to the first title of the bill on border security. And I hope we can finish that today so we do not have to come back in here tomorrow or later. And I see I've used only 2 of my 4 minutes, and I would now yield to Senator Grassley. Clock again for Senator Grassley.
During this committee's markup of the immigration reform bill, I'm going to invoke the themes that the President outlined that day that he pledged to the American people that transparency and the rule of law will be touchstones of his presidency. I plan to ask many questions throughout this process. I want to help the American people understand what's in this 867-page bill. I want to discuss the details and understand the thinking of the authors with regard to many provisions. I want to know how the bill doesn't repeat mistakes that we've made in the past. I want to know how it will benefit generations for years to come. And I want to know how the bill preserves the rule of law. Since we only do comprehensive immigration reform about once in every 25 years, or at least successfully so, we have to get it right. As the authors of 744 hoped, a bill must ensure that the reform is successful so that we don't have to revisit this issue again. The bill before us has some of the same concepts of the 1986 Immigration Reform and Control Act. Title II of that act provides a legalization program. Instead of calling it a registered provisional immigrant status, the 1986 bill allowed the undocumented population to come forward and register with the government for what was termed temporary resident status. A person had to prove they resided in the United States prior to January 1st, 1982, and had to remain physically present in the United States until they adjust to permanent resident status. Like the bill before us, the 1986 law required individuals to learn English, but allowed people to meet that requirement simply by taking a class. Like the bill before us, those in temporary status were authorized to travel and work. Any information in one's application would be considered confidential and could not render the person removable. Applicants had to pay a fee, and there were no numerical limits. There were weak documentation requirements and allowed for sworn affidavits. There were waivers on the ground of inadmissibility. There was a provision that required the Attorney General to give people here illegally with an opportunity to apply for legal status if apprehended during the application period. Nor could people be deported during this time. To top it all off, like the bill before us, the government was to undertake a campaign to disseminate information about the legalization program. Now, this ought to sound very familiar. The sponsors of the bill want Americans to believe that people will wait 10 or 13 years until citizenship is granted. They say it will be tough and expensive road. It would be easier to just go home than to go through the process. I disagree with that sales pitch. Unfortunately, this bill looks too much like the 1986 bill, which failed to take care of the problems we're now trying to solve. It falls short of what I want to see in a strong immigration reform bill. So you will hear me say many times that we shouldn't make the same mistake that we made in 1986. You'll hear me say many times that we want to move ahead with a bill that does it right this time, as the authors of the bill said in the preamble to their things. I will have several amendments that will improve the bill. For instance, I have an amendment to hold the administration accountable for how they will spend the $7.5 billion. I'm going to take as much time as I can because I'm the ranking member. The other people were going to be limited to 4 minutes.
Okay, I limited myself.
Okay.
To 2 minutes.
Yeah.
I know you said all these things before. Take another minute or two if you want.
Okay, thank you very much. I have an amendment to hold the administration accountable for how they spend $7.5 billion in taxpayers' money. I have an amendment to improve the new grant programs created by the legislation. I have another amendment to limit who can take advantage of the generous legalization program, eliminating the ability for some to apply while removing proceedings. I will offer an amendment that undo provisions that weaken current law, because I don't think we should be weakening current law, and I will offer amendments that strengthen existing visa programs. What's hard for me to swallow is a provision on page 10. The triggers in the bill that kick off legalization are weak. No one can dispute that this bill is legalization first, enforcement later. I will have an amendment to require the Secretary to certify to Congress that the Secretary has maintained effective control over the entire southern border for 6 months before proceeding to the application of registered provisional immigrant status. If we pass the bill as is, there will be no pressure on the administration or future administrations or even those of us in Congress. There will be no push by legalization advocates to get that job done. We need to work together to secure the border first. People don't trust the enforcement of the law. That's why it's important that Congress legislate and not delegate so much. There are hundreds of provisions that grant waivers and discretionary authority to the Secretary of Homeland Security. This follows in the footsteps of the health care reform bill. We're learning a lesson every day that whoever administers that bill pushes the envelope and oversteps authority to the maximum extent possible. It's been 3 years since that bill has passed. The executive branch has begun to develop the exchange markets, but it's just not moving along. We can't let the same thing happen with this bill. Now, on my last page, I'll make this statement, that this bill is complex. Any one of us can read 900 pages, but it's another thing to understand it all and to know the consequences of such an undertaking. This bill intersects with the jurisdiction of several other congressional committees. I have a list of the provisions here that we amend 52 other laws, including the National Environmental Policy Act, the Foreign Services Act, the United States Housing Act, the Military Selective Service Act, the Fair Labor Standards Act, the National Science Foundation Act, just to name a few. And so, Mr. Chairman, I can see that by our getting into the jurisdiction of these other committees, that this Judiciary Committee is obviously going to be the most powerful committee in the United States Senate. I yield the floor.
Well, thank you. Said as a courtesy, I allowed the ranking member to take twice as long as would be given to anybody else. I asked Senator Feinstein, did you want to say anything?
I will pass. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Then Senator Schumer.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first, let me thank you for giving us the time here and showing great leadership as we move forward on this legislation. The group of 8 of us, 4 of whom are on this committee, along with Senator Feinstein and Senator who's your other?
Hatch.
And Senator Hatch, spent a great deal of time on this legislation. And we believe it is a sound, balanced, sturdy ship that will now begin its voyage. We believe we have taken all the considerations into account, and we have come up with a fair bill where no one gets everything they want. But at the end of the day, it will mean dramatic improvement for the American economy, for the American people, and will make our immigration policy much more in sync with what is good for jobs and America. And I would ask my colleagues here, what we do, it's founded on a fundamental premise that Americans will support common sense solutions to both future immigration and the 11 million who are living here in the shadows, but only if they are convinced that there will not be future waves of illegal immigration in this country. This bill is far and away the strongest bill that has been put together that has a chance of passing in terms of stopping future flows of illegal immigration. Just on the border alone, Senator McCain and I had an amendment a few years ago, that spent about $600 to $800 million on the border, and effectiveness rate went up from 68 to 82. We spend much more than that, as much as $6.5 billion. The border will effectively be closed, we believe, with these expenditures and the way they will be done. We take future immigration and make sure that we deal with the industries that desperately need help. Google moved 400 engineers as part of Google's map to Vancouver because Canadian immigration policy allowed the people to come there. Our policy didn't, and they couldn't get the workers here. At the same time, in New York State, the leading cabbage grower in New York, a Mr. Juncker from Ontario County, did not plant his thousands of acres of cabbage this year because he couldn't get people to pick the crops. We will change our policy so that people who are needed to help our economy grow can finally come into this country. And at the same time, we will note that when families are divided, the humane thing to do is bring those families back together. And because we so dramatically stop the flow of illegal immigration, we can do both, and we do, and do it fairly. We know our present system is broken. We know the status quo is unacceptable. But we also know that there are many who will want to kill this bill. I would ask my colleagues, if you don't agree with everything, no one does. Be constructive. We are open to changes. But don't make an effort to kill a bill that is the best hope for immigration reform, I believe, that we've had in this country, and frankly, the best hope to help break the partisan gridlock that has strangled the Senate, the Congress, and the country.
Thank you very much, Senator Hatch.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We're up to 4 minutes.
I want to first thank the Gang of Eight for being willing to take this on, and I respect their efforts. This markup is the start of a long process that includes not only this committee and the full Senate, but the House as well. The bill is hundreds of pages long, and hundreds of amendments have already been circulated. As the only other current senator who has chaired this committee, I know that you have a big task ahead of you, Mr. Chairman. I commend the bipartisan group of senators who have developed the bill we begin marking up today. No one should expect a simple solution to such a complex set of problems, but I believe that our goal should be serious, effective legislation that can be broadly supported not only by Congress but also by the American people. I cannot speculate at this early stage about the likelihood of success, but I believe it is possible, and will do whatever I can to help reach that goal. Mr. Chairman, you and I worked for years on patent reform legislation. That process started with a bill many saw as controversial and ended with solid legislation that passed the Senate 89-9. I hope this effort will not take nearly as long, but the patent bill's outcome gives me hope for the task before us now. Let me mention a few areas to which I will be paying particular attention in the weeks ahead, and there are a number of areas that I don't have time to mention. The first is improving the process for allowing high-skilled individuals to enter the United States and work in important technology in other fields. As you know, I introduced, along with Senators Klobuchar, Coons, and Rubio, the I-Squared Act, which so far has 26 bipartisan co-sponsors, including Judiciary Committee members, Senators Klobuchar, Flake, Coons, Lee, and Blumenthal. The bill as currently drafted could render the important H-1B and L-1 visa.
We got things in return.
Could make those unworkable for many employers.
Family unification.
In fact, unless it is changed, this bill could encourage American companies to hire skilled foreign nationals abroad rather than in the United States.
Okay, well.
The second area involves workers in the agriculture sector of our economy.
What, Rubio?
Now, my friend from California, Senator Feinstein, deserves a lot of credit. She's been leading this serious effort to achieve what can be described as a delicate compromise in this area, along with Senators Rubio and Bennett as well. The third area is enforcement. In this or any other area, the best legislation in the world is of little value unless it is seriously and properly implemented and seriously enforced. We have experience to draw from here. Negative experience, I have to admit, but experience all the same. We ignore that experience at our peril, and we will shirk our duty and fail the American people if we repeat the mistakes of the past. As ranking member on the Finance Committee, I'm also concerned about issues within that committee's jurisdiction and have circulated amendments on those issues. They include the treatment of registered provisional immigrants under the President's health care law, maintaining and strengthening the ban on legal immigrants from receiving welfare benefits, the collection of back taxes, and the determination of coverage for Social Security benefits. I look forward to working with all of my colleagues here to address these critical issues. So, Mr. Chairman, my belief that this process can succeed will motivate my participation. There are serious disagreements about both principles and policy in achieving real and meaningful legislation, and that will require addressing the concerns and priorities of conservatives as well as liberals, Republicans as well as Democrats, the House as well as the Senate, and we should never leave that out of the equation. If we have that perspective now and keep it with us as we move forward, I do believe that we can succeed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the senator from Utah, as he said, he having chaired this.
No, it was on.
I don't mean to interrupt your staff, Senator Hatch, but
yes.
The senator from Utah, having chaired this committee, knows how difficult it is to move these things along, and I appreciate his cooperation.
Well, I appreciate your chairmanship, too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The nameplates around this table tell the story.
Thanks, Orrin.
We are a nation of immigrants. Cruz, Hirano, Leahy, Sessions, and all the rest of us. The good news is that in our background, there was someone, a parent or a grandparent, or even before that, who had the courage to pick up and come to this great nation and look for an opportunity for a better life. In my case, it was a mother who was brought to America at the age of 2 from Lithuania. Today, her son serves in the United States Senate. That's my story. That's my family's story, but it's an American story. We are a nation of immigrants. Immigrants have made us what we are today. They have given us the diversity that in many sectors of the world is unthinkable, but which makes us a strong, vibrant leader in the world. Having said that, we know that the history of immigration in this country has not always been positive. We have welcomed the workers to build the transcontinental railroad, and then we have excluded certain groups and said we don't want any of you in our country. If you look at the history of Congress of this legislation back and forth, there have been some noble chapters and some ignoble chapters as well. We know this today. Our immigration system is broken. The laws that we have do not serve us well. And this is our chance in this hearing room to write an immigration bill for the 21st century for America and its future. For the last 4 months, I have been actively involved in a bipartisan group to do that. It is the most diverse political group you can imagine. But we've come together, we've reached an agreement, and we've compromised, and I think we've come up with a good work product. We produced it, brought it forward for the public to review weeks ago. And let me credit the chairman of the committee. He has said to us, we will bring this work product to the Senate Judiciary Committee for a full hearing. When it was over, there were more than 20 witnesses who were brought in for and against this measure. And now we have literally hundreds of amendments to consider. This is as open and democratic process as anyone could ask for. And it is the right thing to do for an issue that is so significant to the future of this nation. We are not only tasked with coming up with an immigration law for America in the 21st century, we are tasked as senators on both sides of the aisle to prove that the democratic process still works on Capitol Hill. There are some here who've already decided they're going to vote against this measure no matter what it says. That is their right. But there are others who come here with a constructive view to make this a better and stronger bill. We encourage their work product. We want that to come forward. Our bill is not perfect. As I've said, the only perfect law ever written was carried down a mountain on clay tablets by Senator Moses. All the rest of our efforts are subject to amendment and improvement, and that's what we're about today. Let me close by saying I know there are millions of people across America who are counting on us to give them a future, to give them the same opportunity that our parents and grandparents had, and to do it in an orderly and legal way. I am proud that we are undertaking this task. We should really focus on it as one of the most important things that may come from this Congress in this year. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sessions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me first say that although the Majority Leader indicated an extraordinarily rushed process would be underway, you've indicated, and I believe we will, have an opportunity to offer amendments and discuss this important legislation in detail, and I thank you for that. First, what do Americans believe about immigration? Well, we believe in it. We're a nation of immigrants. Our current law provides for the yearly admission of over 1 million people, more than any nation in the world. We're proud of that, of being a nation of immigrants, but almost as many have entered the country in recent years illegally as legally, and that has caused great concern. Americans are not happy about that. The people of this country are good and decent. They understand and have compassion for those who are here, even those here illegally. But they have pleaded with, urged, and sometimes demanded that their government end the lawlessness and for the creation of a lawful system, a rational system that admits not too few and not too many, a rational system that serves the national interest, one with clear rules that are enforced. And I certainly support that kind of reform. Wrestling with these issues is what we're about today. While the sponsors of the legislation say this bill meets that goal, it does not. I noticed even Senator Rubio yesterday issued a statement with a lot of changes he believes are necessary. It was crafted in secret essentially by a series of interest groups, and too little concern, in my opinion, was expressed for the impact this huge legislation and the increases in it would have on struggling and hurting American workers and families. with high unemployment, anemic job growth, unprecedented number of workers who've given up and dropped out of the labor force, we must be focusing more on getting jobs for lawful immigrants in our country and Americans. Wages are not even keeping up with inflation, and that's been true for quite a long time. And we should be hearing in depth from sheriffs, police, and immigration officers about how we can make the legal system work. And just today, Mr. Chairman, I would offer for the record and ask for consent a letter from law enforcement officers and ICE officers concerning the reforms and holes that are in this legislation.
Without objection.
Exceedingly important. The sponsors told us there would be enforcement first. This legislation provides immediate amnesty and actually weakens enforcement requirements. It weakens the requirements on the books in many areas. We're told there would be a border fence. There's no fencing requirement in the bill. Critically, we were told there would be a biometric entry-exit system as the 9/11 Commission has called for and Congress has more than once passed. It not happened yet. This bill undermines that requirement. We're told there would be strict requirements on amnesty, but the amnesty is immediate and open to those with multiple misdemeanor convictions, gang affiliations, criminal records, without a guarantee. There's no guarantee of the future enforcement, which is so important, as Senator Grassley noted. We're told there would be the toughest security measures in history, but the border security provisions actually weaken current law, changing 100% operational control to effective control of only 3 of the 9 border sectors. And currently, and it weakens the currently collapsed interior enforcement. Removal or denials of entry can be waived for reasons as vague as hardship, the public interest, and effect. You ready to get me? Now, I had 2 seconds left. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to speak. And I would just say that we need to work hard on this legislation. The sponsors have set forth a vision that's attractive, but the legislation doesn't achieve that vision.
And
therefore,
I
it's
thank
got to be fixed.
A number of the senators in this committee and others in both parties have met with me about their concerns, and of course I'm always open to meet with anybody. In fact, I'm staying here this weekend to work on this bill. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look around this hearing room today and I see so many people from so many countries, and I think about how this has made our country great. Following in Senator Durbin's line, I think of my own relatives, my dad's family coming from Slovenia, working in the mines in northern Minnesota, my mother's parents coming from Switzerland, starting a cheese factory in Wisconsin. That these are our relatives, and everyone watching this hearing today has their own stories, and we must continue that American greatness by getting this bill done. This is also a test of bipartisanship in this Congress. A group has courageously come together to work on this bill, and a number of us on this committee, including Senator Hatch and myself, have worked together on a number of very important pieces of this bill and amendments. We are a country of immigrants. 90 of our Fortune 500 companies were formed by immigrants. 200 of our Fortune 500 companies were started by immigrants or kids of immigrants. 30% of U.S. Nobel laureates were immigrants. Think of those numbers and think of our future if we make sure that we keep the door open. That's what this bill does. It has some much-needed security measures. It establishes a pathway to earn citizenship. It contains the DREAM Act. It has provisions that Senator Hatch and I worked on to make sure that we allow in our engineers and scientists. Think about our situation right now. We have unlimited visas for sports players. And in Minnesota, we love hockey, as Senator Franken knows. We're proud of the fact that we have hockey players from all over the world. We should be doing the same with our engineers and scientists. We don't have enough doctors in this country right now. We want to educate more doctors, but we also have rural areas and inner cities that are underserved by doctors. There's an important provision in this bill that I put together with a number of other senators that allow doctors to finish their residencies in this country and not have to go back to their home countries to finish their residencies. This is an exciting bill. It's a great opportunity for our country to move forward, and I want to thank the chairman for working on this. And I also want to note that we had a hearing in our Joint Economic Committee. I'm the Senate chair this week, and we had great attendance at the hearing, and the focus of the hearing was on the economic consequences of this bill. We heard from a diverse group of witnesses, including Grover Norquist, who came to testify for the bill. And he talked about how this actually brings the debt down in the long term because of the economic opportunity that it creates for this country. We heard testimony in this committee from former Republican head of the Congressional Budget Office, Douglas Holtz-Eakin, who talked about how immigration reform would decrease the debt by $2.7 trillion over the next decade. These are Republican, conservative economists and people who have studied this issue for a long time who see this economic opportunity. America has always been the land of opportunity. And coming from the state that brought the world everything from the pacemaker to the Post-it note, I can tell you that I want the next pacemaker and the next Post-it note to be made in this country by our workers, and that includes native-born workers and people who have had the courage to come here from other countries, get an education, and decide to contribute to the productivity of America. That's what this bill is about. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Cornyn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We obviously all bring our own unique experiences to this discussion, but my congratulations to the Gang of Eight for their constructive work. But now's the time for the other 92 members of the United States Senate to weigh in, and I hope we'll have a process that allows all of us to contribute. It's, I think, notable that we have 43 new senators in the Senate since the last time we took up a comprehensive immigration bill in 2007. So there's a lot of people who know a lot about this topic and a lot of people who are engaging in this subject perhaps anew. People come to America for many different reasons. Of course, as we're sometimes painfully reminded, not everyone comes with good intentions. But the vast majority of immigrants, both legal and illegal, come because they want to make a better life for themselves and their families. America is a welcoming nation that rewards hard work and the entrepreneurial spirit. That spirit and work ethic is alive and well in Texas, where we continue to grow the economy and add jobs. In Texas, we welcome hard-working people who are willing to take a risk and start a business, people who start with nothing and lift themselves up and help their families live a better life. Our conversation about America's immigration system is at core about people, and we must never forget that. It's about the Mexican-American landowners and ranchers in the Rio Grande Valley, many of whom called the border region their home for generations. It's about the Vietnamese restaurant owner in Houston, whose daughter works as a hostess when she's home from college on break. It's about the Salvadorans working in the kitchen who hope to save up enough money to open their own restaurant someday. It's about a gifted young technologist from China who wants to be the next Michael Dell or Andy Grove. It's about dreams and success stories, but it's also about heartache and tragedy. It's about the family of illegal immigrants terrorized by violent street gangs who refuse to call the police out of fear that their encounters with law enforcement could lead to their deportation. It's about a young woman from Nicaragua who pays a coyote thousands of dollars to illegally cross the U.S.-Mexico border only to be exploited as a victim of modern-day slavery. These are uncomfortable and emotional issues, but we cannot ignore them. This is a debate that cannot be guided by emotion alone, though. This debate is about our most deeply held values. One of those is respect for the rule of law. For too long, our immigration laws have gone unenforced and have been violated with impunity. Our effort to fix the broken immigration system must begin at the border, where we must set objective, realistic goals and then meet those goals. But as we all know, we can't solve the problem just at the border alone. 40% of our illegal immigration is a result of people who enter the country legally but never leave when their visa expires. We have passed the law in 1996 mandating an entry-exit system which has never, ever been implemented. We must provide employers with a straightforward, accurate verification system to determine the legal status of new hires. And it's our duty to look carefully at every provision of the bill and to speak up if we disagree and to offer constructive suggestions to improve it. So I anticipate a spirited civil discussion about the bill, but my constituents at their core are pragmatists. That's because we live with this issue every day of our lives because of our 1,200-mile common border with Mexico, and the fact that about a third of my constituents and Senator Cruz's constituents are Hispanic, who've been the benefits of our immigration system and who've added immeasurably to our state. This legislation makes a number of positive improvements, but there are areas that need to be improved even more. So I look forward to a robust discussion, and I trust, Mr. Chairman, given the size and the scope of this bill, that you'll continue the committee's tradition of an open and robust debate.
Well,
the challenge before us is to get this right and not to simply get it done. Thank you.
I appreciate that, and we will. One of the things we did, and I think for the first time in a bill of this significance in the Senate, had every single amendment posted online in advance of the markup. And I might say on a personal note, I know what the Senator means about the border of his own state. As he knows, I remember my family lived for a while in El Paso, and I saw a lot of that border at that time. I walked across it several times with him and saw the lines and the diversity of everything from vehicles to people. So I visited the border with a family member several times in Texas. Senator Whitehouse, did you wish to say something, sir?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to congratulate you on the process that we have gone through. I think the process of hearing and now markup has been very fair and has been a really good balance between those who are very, very eager to get to work on this bill and those who want to make sure that all of their procedural rights are protected. I think you've done a very good job of that. Clearly, you're not going to satisfy everybody because there are people who never want to go to this bill. There's no amount of procedure that will satisfy them because that's not the purpose. But I think you've done a very good job, and I'm delighted to move forward and have nothing to add other than looking forward to getting to work on the amendments.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and I'm eager to get to those amendments too, but hopefully I'll let everybody speak for up to 4 minutes. Senator Lee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We all agree that our immigration system is broken and it needs to be fixed. I support fundamental immigration reform, and I'm encouraged that both houses of Congress are willing to consider this year. I believe we have an opportunity to make progress where there's broad consensus on a number of necessary and long overdue reforms. But overhauling our entire immigration system isn't going to be simple, and it won't happen overnight. This is because we don't face just one big immigration problem. Our immigration system is a complex puzzle with dozens of interconnected parts and pieces, and some reforms must be completed before others can even really begin. Indeed, certain preliminary measures are necessary prerequisites for other subsequent reforms. For example, we simply won't understand how best to address the problem of our constantly shifting illegal immigration population until our borders are actually secure and we know who has overstayed their visas. That's why it's somewhat futile to make decisions about later stages before the essential foundations are even in place. Trying to solve every problem all at once is the surest way to avoid fixing any of them very well. Good policy doesn't flow from massive bills that seek to resolve every conceivable issue in a single sweeping piece of legislation. We're in the immigration mess that we face today because a single comprehensive bill in 1986 didn't come close to fixing all of our problems 27 years ago. Despite good intentions, in many ways that bill may have made things worse, and the American people deserve better. Serious efforts at lasting immigration reform will have to be considered and implemented in stages over the course of years. That's why I favor a sensible, incremental approach. Republicans and Democrats share much common ground on the most immediate issues. We're largely in agreement on essential elements like border security, employment verification, visa reform, guest worker programs, and high-skilled immigration. And we could enact significant reforms in each of these critical areas immediately. Such concrete, incremental progress shouldn't be sacrificed to demands that we try to address every challenge at once. or that we seek to resolve the most intractable problems first. We ought not hijack meaningful progress on common sense preliminary measures by linking them to subsequent, more contentious ones. I appreciate the efforts of my colleagues who have worked hard to develop the comprehensive proposal we begin to mark up today. But I believe success in actually achieving the goals identified in this legislation must come through a series of incremental reforms that first ensure the foundational pieces like border security and an effective entry-exit system are implemented properly. The long-standing disconnect between immigration policy and enforcement has created deep distrust that the federal government will or even can keep its promises. For decades, Congress has legislated border and legal immigration enforcement policies only to have administrations of both parties fail later to implement them. Many conservatives like me are eager to enact fundamental immigration reform so long as those reforms begin with a secure border and a renewed commitment to enforce our immigration laws. But this bill doesn't do quite enough to establish that foundation. Instead, it gives broad discretion to the Department of Homeland Security to make unreviewable determinations about easily manipulated security goals. According to one tally, the bill includes 400 different waivers, exceptions, and exemptions the administration can use to relax enforcement measures without any oversight or input from Congress. As written, the bill's border security triggers may be illusory, yet the legislation provides for legalization and a path to citizenship prior to any actual demonstrable success in securing the border. This is precisely why such comprehensive immigration reform is so controversial. It rejects step-by-step reforms and refuses to allow the American people an opportunity to assess and approve the initial fixes before further reforms proceed. I look forward to this process and to making this legislation.
Thank you very much, Senator Lee. And Senator Franken.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've said this before. I think because this is such a complex problem with so many moving parts that we actually do need a comprehensive plan in order to address it, that taking this piecemeal won't work. I'm looking forward to starting work on this bill. I have several bipartisan amendments I plan to offer to help Minnesota small businesses and help children and families. I'm not going to go any longer. Let's start this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to begin by thanking the members of the Gang of Eight who have worked, I think, very hard on a complex issue and have put a great deal of time and energy into addressing that. And I appreciate that effort. I appreciate that we are now having this process to address a broken immigration system. Virtually everyone agrees the immigration system we have now is broken. I very much hope that what we are embarking on will prove to be a real markup. And it will be, I hope, a process to improve this bill. The majority has the votes on this committee to vote down every minority amendment, or virtually every minority amendment if it so chooses. I hope the majority does not take that approach. We have seen that approach in prior instances, and that's not an approach that, in my view, leads to passing a bill. Let me be clear. I want common sense immigration reform to pass. I think the American people want it to pass, but they want it to pass in a way that fixes the problem. And I am hopeful that the majority on this committee will work, as I trust it will, in good faith, to improve this bill and to consider amendments that would make real changes to this bill. I've introduced 3 types of amendments that, in my view, are important for improving this bill. The first, and we're considering a set of amendments today, addresses border security, and in my view, the bill has grave problems when it comes to border security. As currently drafted, the bill is essentially a plan-to-plan for the Department of Homeland Security, and it contains toothless metrics, which in my judgment would render it a virtual certainty that if this bill were passed a few years hence, we'd be having yet more hearings discussing why the border is still not secure and the problem of illegal immigration remains. I've introduced an amendment, others have introduced amendments to put real teeth in the border security elements. I hope this committee will give those amendments serious consideration. Secondly, I've introduced a pair of amendments to improve legal immigration. In my view, the best elements of the Gang of Eight bill are the elements dealing with legal immigration, and I think we should improve and streamline legal immigration. I've introduced one amendment to double the cap of legal immigration from 675,000 to 1.3 million. Another to take the high-tech H-1B visas that are coming in and to increase them by 500%, from 65,000 to 325,000. I think we need to remain a nation that welcomes and embraces legal immigrants, and in both regards, my amendments go further to improving legal immigration than does the Gang of Eight. And finally, I've introduced amendments to remove the pathway to citizenship for those who are here illegally and to make them ineligible for means-tested government benefits. In my view, if those provisions are insisted upon, and the majority has the votes to insist on those provisions, it is likely to scuttle this bill and cause it to be voted down in the House of Representatives. I don't want this bill to be voted down, and I hope the stakeholders who want this bill to be passed will be interested in amendments to craft a bill that will pass, and I look forward to working with the committee members in that process.
Thank you, and every member is going to have a chance, of course, to bring up amendments they want. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a truly historic opportunity, and the nation is watching us to see if we as a body, as a committee and as a Senate, can deal in a full and open and robust debate with one of our most important and most challenging issues. As many other senators have said, something that has always defined us, being a nation of immigrants, and something where our own history has been both positive at times and deeply negative at times. And I look forward to an open and public and transparent debate, and I'm thankful to the chairman for taking us into the beginning of a markup where there will be hundreds of amendments considered and either adopted or disposed of. And to the point just made, I look forward to voting for several of the minority amendments today. I think there are amendments that perfect and improve on this bill, and I think this is exactly the sort of a fair and open process which the people of the United States expect of us. This bill, in my view, addresses some of the most critical shortcomings of our badly broken immigration system, and I'm deeply thankful to the 8 senators, the bipartisan working group that has labored so hard to make such significant progress in this legislation. In my own short time in the Senate, I've been privileged to meet with people up and down the state of Delaware and from all over this country who've been affected in profound ways by what is wrong about our current immigration system. And we have an opportunity here, if we would but seize it, to make tremendous progress. As many have already recognized, where we are today is totally unacceptable. We have too many people living in the shadows. We have too many families broken by our current immigration system. There are too many young people raised in this country who cannot participate fully in its promise and opportunity. Too many of our best and brightest minds trained at our universities with their higher education funded by taxpayers are then forced home to other countries to compete against us with their best ideas. And far too often, our immigration system and how it's enforced bears no resemblance to the most fundamental values of our country and Constitution. Now's the time. I look forward to getting to amendments, to getting to work and finding ways together to strengthen this bill. And I'm confident that when we are finished, this legislation will make our country stronger, will boost our economy, will show the nation that we can work together, and we will both end illegal immigration into the United States and deal humanely, fairly, and responsibly with the terrible impact on families and communities of our current immigration system. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Flake.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And let me just say that this is how the Senate should work. Legislation has been crafted, long, arduous process, but it's here. It came here with sufficient time for people to read and to offer amendments. More than 300 amendments were filed. And in my view, the vast majority of them are to make the bill better. And a lot of this legislation already bears the work of many in this room who weren't part of the Gang of Eight. Senator Hatch, many of the provisions, obviously Senator Feinstein worked on the ag provisions for a long time. Senator Klobuchar and others worked, and we've met and talked with others around this table and in the Senate to make sure that the legislation, as it was introduced, bared the mark of many around the Senate. But I'm convinced that it will be improved in this process, and as many have said, maybe if we can do this, then it will help in other areas as well, like the budget, that we can all work together. But I just want to say that I'm pleased to be part of this process and to go through regular order as we're doing now. I'm convinced that we'll have a better product at the end of this process, at the end of this markup, than we started with. And so thank all of you for participating.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Coons is right. The nation is watching, but really the world is watching what we do here today. The world is watching because we are the greatest nation in the history of the world, and our system of immigration is broken and unworthy of the greatest nation in the history of the world. And I want to thank the senators, 8 senators who have given us this draft, Senator Schumer and Senator Durbin of this committee, and the others who have participated with great courage that I hope our committee will match. The courage that they've demonstrated is the same courage that immigrants do every day when they come to this country, that my dad did when he was 17 years old. 17 years old, coming to this country with nothing more than a shirt on his back, knowing no one, speaking no English. Every one of us has a story like that one. Every single member of this committee, everyone in this room, has that story that they can recount. We are a nation of immigrants, and our diversity makes us strong. When I am down or discouraged about America, I go to immigration and naturalization ceremonies that are held on Fridays in our state in federal courtrooms. And anybody who hasn't done it recently ought to do it, and I hope we can capture that spirit in these proceedings. They are a combination of wedding ceremonies, graduations, family birthdays. People come with tears in their eyes, their neighbors and friends along with them, because this is one of the great moments in their lives. And what I tell them is, thank you for becoming Americans. Thank you for wanting to become an American and taking a test that most Americans could not pass. And I hope we can match their courage in these proceedings, people wanting to become Americans, because they want to add strength and value to the greatest nation on earth, and they do. Let me just close by saying that we have a historic opportunity, but it is also a fragile and fleeting opportunity. If not now, when? Probably not for a generation will we reform this broken immigration system. And the provisions that we've been given in this draft are interlocking. They are mutually dependent and mutually supportive. They are a construct that has attracted rare consensus, and I hope that we can build on them. And just to close, to address the concern that Senator Cruz has raised, what we do here ought to be completely bipartisan, in fact nonpartisan, because there is nothing Republican or Democrat about an immigrant coming to this country seeking freedom, opportunity, and the tremendous future that this country holds for each of them. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Senator Ronald.
My mic doesn't seem to be working. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your leadership, and I join my colleagues in thanking the Gang of Eight for the tremendous work that they put into this bill, and to all the others who have worked on this and continue to work on this measure. Yes, we are a nation of immigrants, and we all have stories to tell. Senator Durbin, Senator Klobuchar, Senator Blumenthal, we all have stories to tell. My story is of a very courageous mother who brought me and my two brothers to this country. I am an immigrant. And she did this and raised three of us by herself because of her avowed belief that we could have better lives in this country called America. So as we go forward, always remembering that immigrants are human beings with families. They come here. The success of immigrants in this country is the success of immigrants and their families. And so I look forward to going forward, coming up with common sense, humane immigration reform so that, for example, I know that we're joined here by Filipino World War II veterans who are still waiting decades to be rejoined with their children. That's the kind of reform that we need, and I look forward to going forward with all of you. Aloha.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Senator Graham was not here earlier. Now you up to 4 minutes to Senator Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you personally for all the help you've been to get this bill moving forward, to Senator Grassley and all my colleagues on our side. This is a day that we've all been waiting for. We're going to have a spirited debate. I think there'll be a lot of good ideas offered. Hopefully we can make the bill better. About immigration, I'm told that my grandfather on my dad's dad came from Scotland, and he was part of a cattle thief ring, and so I'm trying to keep the family tradition alive by being in politics, I guess. The bottom line is we all come from somewhere, unless you're a Native American. But having said that, that doesn't mean everybody can come when they want to. We've got disorder, and we want order. We got chaos. And a couple things about immigration reform. Senator Sessions and I agree on something, I think, fundamentally. No guest worker should get a job at the expense of an American worker. We need labor, we need high-tech, we need low-skill labor because we're a declining population. But this bill, I think, protects the American worker from being displaced. That's important to me. Why do you have 11 million illegal immigrants coming to America? Well, most of them are not Canadian for a reason. We're not being overrun by Canadians because that is a stable country with a stable economy. They come to Myrtle Beach in March, go swimming, and go home. The people who come here illegally come from very poor and corrupt countries. I understand why they come, but we just can't continue this practice. They come to work. I think substantively this bill on the E-Verify side will do more to control illegal employment, hiring of illegal immigrants than any idea I've seen in a long time. The fence, the combination of border security will make it harder to come here illegally, but the key is if you get here, you can't find a job because we finally got a way to control illegal hiring, and under this bill, you get a chance to find out who's legal and who's not. If you hire an illegal immigrant in the future, you're going to get fined heavily, lose your business, or may go to jail. As to the guest worker program, I think it allows our businesses access to legal labor paying a fair wage. Three things have to happen in my political lifetime, and I don't expect to live to be 100 like Strom did. We've got to reform energy. We've got to exploit our energy resources in an environmentally sensitive way, and quite frankly, expand the energy footprint in America to grow our economy. We have to do the big deal by reforming entitlements and reforming the tax code. But if we don't have an immigration reform as part of that, we're not going to grow. 10,000 baby boomers a day are retiring. The 18 to 49-year-old demographic is flattening out because our native-born population is not growing fast enough to maintain a vibrant economy. That means legal immigration has to be made available. This bill creates a merit-based legal immigration system where we choose who comes based on the economic needs of the country, a fundamental reshaping of immigration. Immigration doesn't need to be reformed. It needs to be stripped down and start over, and I think we've substantially accomplished that. Substantively, I think this bill will prevent a third wave of illegal immigrants. In 1986, as Senator Grassley said, we gave amnesty, but we got 11 million. We had 3 then. The key is controlling who gets a job, controlling your border, having legal access to labor, and being rational with 11 million. They're going to have a chance to come into the legal system on our terms, not theirs. They're going to have to wait a long time. They're going to have to learn our language. They're going to have to pay a fine. They're going to have to get back of the line, but that's what they should do, and I think that's a practical way to do it. And at the end of the day, there's some good people coming out of this group and some people won't make it, but we got to move on as a nation. I'm proud that we're back at the table trying to solve the immigration problem. I am very happy this day has arrived.
Thank you very much, and I thank you for all your work on this. Senator Durbin reminded me that Esther Oliveria is in the audience, and those of us who served with Senator Kennedy know that she was Ted Kennedy's key staffer in the last immigration bill. So those of us who had the opportunity to work with
May I say something?
Ted remember that. Senator Feinstein, who has not spoken before, says she has 2 or 3 sentences she'd like to.
Just a couple, Mr. Chairman. I think for those of us sitting at this table, this is the only chance we're going to have to reform what is a very broken system and to bring a lot of people who have worked very hard in this country out of the shadows. And I think for most of us, it is probably just about the most important piece of legislation that will come out of the committee. And I want to say thank you to those who worked on it, and I want to say thank you to Senator Hatch, who helped with the ag jobs part of it, and Senator Schumer. I have one concern, and I want to express it. Senator Kyle and I, for years, worked to try to get full funding of the federal responsibility to pay counties for jail detention and prison payments. This is called the SCAP program. Over the years, the federal participation has just dropped, and more of the responsibility has fallen onto the local governments, and that's just a fact. Yesterday, I was visited by the leadership of Los Angeles County, who was concerned that what we do here not transfer costs onto the states and the counties. Los Angeles has 1.1 million undocumented. They have 10% of the total population in the country. And as members here know, there are no federal benefits that accompany this bill for just about 15 years. And that includes temporary assistance for needy families, supplemental nutrition assistance, supplemental security income, full scope Medicaid benefits. So everybody would be ineligible for those for 15 years. I've talked to Senator Schumer about this. He assures me that there will be no transfer of these benefits onto local jurisdictions. I just think we need to be very conscious of this because for a state like California that has certainly more undocumented, and I think most border states, we don't want to see this happen. So I have his assurance that it's not going to happen, and we will
have my assurance
with that in mind. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that opportunity.
Thank you very much. And everybody's had a chance to speak. I appreciate the comments both sides have made.
We'll have more on the immigration markup from last week as this quorum call continues. Today here on the floor, senators started the day out with general speeches, and in about an hour and a half at 5 o'clock Eastern Time, they'll return to debate a bill to fund the Army Corps of Engineers water projects. Senators are considering amendments. No votes today. A vote is scheduled for tomorrow to limit debate and amendments to the bill. One amendment proposed by Louisiana Democrat Mary Landrieu would freeze flood insurance rates for a number of years. Over on the other side of the Capitol, the House is out today. Members resume legislative work tomorrow. They'll vote this week on repealing the health care law and requiring the SEC to look into the costs of new regulations before implementing them. You can watch live coverage of the House when members gavel back in over on our companion network, C-SPAN. And this week, the Senate is working on immigration legislation in committee. On Tuesday and Thursday, we'll have live coverage of the markup of the bipartisan bill that was put together by the Gang of Eight. And you can find coverage on the C-SPAN networks starting at 10 a.m. Tuesday. Earlier this past week, the Senate Judiciary Committee began consideration of the 300 amendments to the immigration bill. The first set dealt with technical corrections and improvements to the bill. We'll take a look at those now.
Now, for the sponsors amendment, I call on Senator Schumer of New York.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I offer this amendment on behalf of the sponsors of the bill, myself, Senator Durbin, Senators Menendez and Bennett, who are not, well, are they sponsors of a, no, just myself, Senator Durbin, Senator Graham, and Senator Flake. This is very simple. It's a complete substitute to S-744, and it's in line with Senator Grassley's request. Senator Grassley requested, I thought it was very appropriate, that we try to have the language, the final language after we made all the technical corrections available in advance. And so we made that in advance. I believe it was a week ago Tuesday, so that when people offered amendments, they would be offering it to the actual bill we're voting on. As you know, in many bills, we just do this so-called managers or sponsors amendment right at the same time. So that's what it does. It's technical. It fixes legal citations, grammatical and stylistic corrections, technical adjustments, and makes several important clarifications, which I want to make clear. It clarifies the specific visas that will have surcharges to pay for the cost of the legislation. It clarifies that the visa surcharges included in this bill don't sunset. It amends the merit-based point system to charge a $1,500 surcharge for merit-based green cards to pay for the bill. It clarifies that aliens who have advanced degrees in science, technology, and engineering and math are exempt from the green card caps. It clarifies that biological and biomedical sciences are included in the list of STEM fields, and it provides for video conference verification of remote workers under the E-Verify system. All of the amendments of the members of this committee are keyed to the sponsors' amendment, so I would ask unanimous consent the sponsors' amendment be accepted.
Senator Grassley.
Yeah. First of all, let me explain to all the members of the committee. I've got so many questions here, and obviously if I was going to ask all these questions, it'd be seen just as a stall. So I'm going to ask some questions that I pick and choose that I think are most important. First of all, I'd like to make a statement that nobody has to answer, but I want to bring up the issue that we sent several questions to Secretary Napolitano before, as a result of the hearing we had with her. And we haven't received any answers to those, and I don't expect anybody here to speak for her, but I think that we're entitled to those answers as we know the administration's position on the legislation. And Senator Schumer, if I'm going to ask you these questions or anybody else that wants to answer them, I'm trying to make the point that these really aren't technical, but we aren't going to quibble over that one word. But I want to make a point that, and a question of why and how did you decide to move from $100 million of implementation in the original bill to $1 billion implementation now? It seems to me that adding 1 zero isn't a technical change.
Okay, yes. The answer is very simple. From the time we came up with our bill, our watchword here is to have this bill pay for itself. In other words, we do not want it to incur any costs to the taxpayers, the Treasury, or anybody else. That'll be a balance. It'll be the costs of administering the E-Verify program and the exit-entry visa program, the costs of strengthening the border, and the costs of just administering the new immigrants who will be coming here. So we wanted to make sure that was paid for, and obviously that's not an easy equation. You've got to make sure. So the amount of money needed, we consulted with CBO, we consulted with the Appropriations Committee, we consulted with the tax committees, and with other relevant departments. And the reason we have changed the numbers is to make sure there's a balance.
I've got 5 questions.